My guest today is Jim, who had a near-death experience that he's going to share with us. Jim, thanks for joining me. How are you doing?
Thank you so much, Rich. How are you doing today? I'm doing great.
Doing good. You are free to start at whatever point you feel is most relevant to the story, and you can take it from there.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here with you today and with your listeners. Um, my near-death experience is really different from most that we hear about. There was no tunnel per se, no meeting of dead loved ones. I would say I had a functional equivalent to a life review, but it wasn't really like a life review. And then, yeah, it wasn't certainly wasn't the rainbows and unicorns versions you hear about either. Seeing dead loved ones saying, "Hey, it's great over here, it's beautiful," and angels and all that. No, 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 no. It was different. Um, I used to build and fly my own aircraft, historical reproductions, and on this day, I was in a second test flight of one particular aircraft, and I wasn't really happy with the way it handled. So I was trying to master its quirks. And in that time, I lost my engine and I couldn't make it back to my airfield. So because up here in this part of Connecticut, where there are a lot of hills, a lot of rocks, and a lot of forests, the only place I could find was a small lake in a nearby Boy Scout camp that was closed for that time of year, which was in October 6 years ago, October 6th. So I aimed for the lake, thinking, well, I'll just put it down in the water. It's an open cockpit plane. I'll just pop the seatbelt and I'll be fine. But I overshot the bank and I crashed into all these tree trunks, obliterating my aircraft. It just turned instantly into matchsticks. And when I did that, I broke all of my ribs. I ruptured both lungs. I had a hole in my lower back from the battery breaking loose and hitting me at 70 miles an hour. My right leg had multiple fractures. I was pretty torn up. And luckily, there was a man fishing in the camp because he enjoyed the fact that it was closed and peaceful. And he watched the whole thing. But he was able to come over and keep me propped up so I could gasp for breath since I didn't have functioning lungs, and call 911. And they sent a helicopter in to pull me out of the wreckage. When my family finally got the news that I'd been flown up to Hartford's trauma center and came to check on me, I was in a breathing machine. I had all kinds of tubes going in and out of me to keep me alive. And I'd already escaped the restraints once, and they re-restrained me. And they said, we have we have like a week's worth of 8-hour plus operations coming up. And we could lose him at any time. And some of these operations only have about a 2% chance of success. So we recommend putting him into a coma so that, he doesn't escape the next set of restraints, because he's kind of a handful. And my family said, yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Let's put him into the coma. So without, having really been sitting there with a stopwatch and timing all this, my best guess is that when they put me into a coma here, that's when my near-death experience started. As to whether I was there for the entire week or not, who can say, right? Maybe I came in, maybe I went out, but it seemed like I was there a week for it being kind of a timeless space. And like I said, in contrast to many people who say they've been through a tunnel, for me, it was like I teleported. And where I went to, the easiest way to describe it is it looked like a post-apocalyptic landscape. Like, imagine a large city like Las Vegas, for example, 1,000 years after the meteor hits, right? What might that look like? Well, other than a big crater. So let's say a nuclear blast or something, but it's a huge dead city in ruins. And there were these huge storm clouds above my head as well. It looked like they were just ready to unload with the mother of all storms. And the only thing I would say that was of interest there that I could see was this large, like a sculpture that looked like an egg made out of open lattice work. If you were to go to my website, which is www.inbetweenproductions, that's with an S, inbetweenproductions.com, you'll see a picture of what I'm talking about. And you'll also be able to read word for word my narrative of my experience. So I noticed it, and I can see small movements within. So I made my way over to it, and suspended in the air within this egg were these special kinds of gears called sector gears. A sector gear isn't the kind of gear you see a lot, except you will find them in clock-like mechanisms. I think you might find them in motorcycle transmissions. When you think of a gear, normally think of a wheel with little teeth all the way around it. A sector gear is a section of gear, like a pie slice, if you will, and it's made to go back and forth and back and forth. So that's it. So what I did was, as I looked at the gears, some were very much in focus and some were not in focus, like very ghost-like, and they were actually passing through each other in a physically impossible manner. I remember just thinking, wow, what's this all about? And as I looked at each gear, a video feed of some event they apparently represented would play in my head. All you had to do is look at it, and you could essentially read the gear by the representation of video in your head. And I realized these were all events in my future. I thought, well, isn't that interesting? So I reached through to see if I could touch one of these gears. And one brushed by my hand. And when it did, this jolt of pain went through me like nausea. And with a reflex, I grabbed it and I pulled it out through the lattice work and threw it away. And when I did that, I don't know why I thought I could do that, but I did. And when I did, all of the gears started spinning around inside, and then they sort of settled down again. And I actually kind of asked out loud, what is this? What just happened? And this disembodied voice spoke, and it stayed with me the entire time and said, you're in the in-between. I said, in between what? It said, everything. You're standing inside the eternity of a single moment. And I remember saying, well, that doesn't make much sense. And it said, well, do you remember the world to which your body belongs? And I swear to God, I did not. If someone had said, if you stay here any longer, you can't go back, I would have said, go back where? To your home. What home? To your family. What family? I was, for want of a better word, I was just depersonalized down to zero. I had no fear, no emotions, no thought. I was just present. And I said, so, what is going on in this place? What does this place represent? And it said, this is the future birthing into the now. And I said, so why, when I reach in here and touch these gears, why do some cause me pain? And it said, every choice has unintended consequences, some good and some not so good. And said, each one's pain that it brings is your guide on which ones you should choose and which ones you should not. In other words, how better to know whether you should choose something or not, if there's any ambiguity around the choice, than to be able to feel the pain of that decision up front, especially if it's pain you're causing other people. So that's what this was. And I realized pretty quickly that I was being given the opportunity to essentially stack the deck, to remove other bad choices in my future, and ones that would be to my spiritual detriment. And so as I kept fishing around in there, using pain as a guide instead of some moral compass to figure out which choices to remove, to, like I say, stack the deck in my favor so that I'm left more and more with only good decisions I can make. I kept having a conversation with this disembodied voice. And, it said some very profound things that, like I said, are on the website, word for word. And I remember one of the coolest things it said, because I noticed that after a while, I looked around, I saw this huge pile of gears that I'd removed. I said, it looks like if I don't have a bad life, I have no life at all. Am I going to die sooner from doing all this? And it said, your number of breaths are already counted. I will worry about your last one. And then it said, for those who make poor use of choices, offering fewer possibilities could be called mercy. And I said, I don't know how comforting that is. And it said, well, be gentle with everyone as I'm gentle with you. And I said, what's gentle about all this? And it said, you're here because you prayed to be here. And now the man who fell from the sky is not the same who flew into it. And with that, it pretty much kicked me out, and I came back. And coming back was probably a little strange to use as a terminology, because coming out of coma and inducing drugs, I would say it was probably another week before I had any kind of a functioning mind or memory or anything. I was already transported to a rehabilitation hospital when I really came to and had my first sense of self and sense of being anywhere. But I will say this, with that initial realization that, oh, here I am, like I said before, using the phrase a video feed of this experience was just playing over and over and over in my head. And with each iteration, there was more detail. There was more of an emotional oomph to the experience. And I was just like, what the hell was this? I mean, I had heard of near-death experiences. I would say I was more familiar with like what you might call out-of-body experiences. And I was thinking this must have been an out-of-body experience. It was only with research and later on that I realized, oh, this is called a near-death experience, because it's very specific. I mean, God, I nearly died. In fact, I did die 5 times. And I've never really told anybody that. It's not in my books. I've never really told anybody, because people get into a pissing contest about, I was deader than you were. I've died 4 times than you. And it's like, where does that become an important part of the story? And again, a near-death experience doesn't mean that everyone dies having the experience. They just come very close to it. So I don't like to get distracted by, like I said, those kinds of stupid comparisons. But if anybody wants to know, yeah, I died 5 times. So there you go. But what was interesting is when I came to, I would say the process of how to integrate that experience started right away, because I used to have a pretty colorful life over in a lot of different war zones. And my wife at the time had taped to the wall this like really cool macho picture of me in Afghanistan, gun running for the military to the Northern Alliance who were killing Taliban. And I'm standing there, like smoking a huge Cuban cigar. It's like perfect match.com. And anyway, she put that picture up there because, to her, that was like the best version of me. And that's the version she wanted me to heal back to. And, the guy who builds World War I airplanes and goes and flies them and all this stuff, the real daring do. But when I looked at that picture, I literally thought, like, who's that guy? That is not me. I am very much changed now. So this isn't me. This isn't who I am. So, we definitely hear in people's near-death experiences how much they do change. Some may become more religious, but everyone becomes more spiritual. And like the Dalai Lama said one time, it was really cool. He said, religion is the tip of the finger. Spirituality is the moon to which the finger points. And that really sums it up really well, because now you're you're changed, you're different. You ask yourself this question every day: is what was true yesterday still true today? It's almost like going through adolescence when, you're very self-absorbed because you're going through this spurt of puberty in which you are changing on a daily basis, not only physically, but emotionally, mentally, intellectually. Everything is just on like overdrive. And so you ask that question yourself: is what was true yesterday true today? And that makes, young people appear to be very self-absorbed, but how can they not be, because they're feeling differently every day about things. They think differently every day about things because they're trying to find out, first of all, where they fit in the tribe. And that's from figuring out where they fit within themselves. So they ask a lot of questions. That's why that, connection is so important to young people. So I'm sitting there thinking, wow, how do I even describe this to anyone? But I could feel the experience trying to literally like push itself out of me. Like I'm coming out, whether you talk about it or not, I'm going to come out through your pores, but I'm coming. I was like, okay. So I had three, in the hospital, I had 3 shifts of nurses, right? And, different 8-hour shifts. And in the morning, I had this one nurse. Her name was Jen. Don't know her last name. And she was totally the A-team. She was fantastic. And I realized that we had a really nice rapport. Like sometimes she would just seem to be hanging out in the room because she enjoyed, talking about whatever we might talk about. Well, like I said, I had that picture on the wall. So that always invited people to say, oh, what's that all about? Tell us about that life. But I said to her, I said, listen, I have this crazy thing going on in my head, since I've come out of my crash. I said, can I share it with you? And she said, sure. And I could tell she really was interested. And so I shared with her. She was the first person I shared my near-death experience with. And during this, she started to cry. And I said, why are you crying? She says, because I don't want you to die. I said, you're a nurse in a hospital. You see death all the time. And she said, yeah, but you're magical. I said, what do you mean? And she said, everybody's really busy here, as you know. And, doctors and patients said patients may only get 15 minutes of their doctor's time a day. For some reason, you have 3 to 5 doctors in here for like an hour and a half every day. I walk by snooping, and you're talking about everything but your medical case. One doctor wants you to be in business with him so badly. Here you are at night on international conference calls with your leg in a cage up in the air, you doped up on codeine. And yeah, I've never seen anything like that. That was when I think I started to realize that in terms of how people change, we hear how a lot of people, as part of a near-death experience, will develop, I call it, whether it's abilities or whatever. Some people can talk to dead people. Some people can see the future. Some people have telepathy, whatever that. I would say most everybody has a heightened sense of empathy. And for me, it's like empathy was my superpower. Though I hate saying that, and that just sounds horrible to say because, it should just be what's natural to us. But empathy really seemed to be the thing. People seem to just want to hang out in my room. And one night around 2 a.m., this older matronly nurse came in to check on me, and I just pretended to be asleep because I didn't want to talk. And she leaned over and kissed me on the forehead. And I thought, how sweet was that? How nice was that? And then after that, when I went back out into the world, I was only in the hospital for 7 weeks, even with all those injuries. Like one time I was in New York at the Port Authority, and I got in line with probably about 30 people waiting for coffee. And for some reason, the person behind the counter literally came out from behind the counter. They walked down the entire line up to me and asked me what I wanted. And then they got it for me. And I was like, where did that come from? And it's just more of these like magical moments of connecting with people. And then also were some interesting synchronicities, which I think are highly validating, because I think synchronicities increase because an NDE is kind of like a reboot. You've rebooted the system, right? And when you have to reboot your computer, usually you're cleaning up its processes, like the RAM was overloaded, so now you clean that out. You might have had other things running in the background that needed updating, so they get updated. All these kinds of things that really make it run more efficiently. And to me, this is kind of what an NDE does. And so when you have this reboot, synchronicities, I think, easily become more noticeable or more prevalent. And one day I had someone come to my house to take a lot of my window screens and repair them. This was coming out of the winter, and here in Connecticut, between the ice and the wind and all that, it can tear up your screen sometime. So his wife called and said, "Your screens are ready." I said, "Okay, great. I'll be by Friday later afternoon to pick them up." So as I walk in, it's a husband-wife thing. She's sitting there. I can see she's holding my invoice, but she's on the phone, and he's sitting there like drawing pictures of screens he's repairing. And for some reason, and this happens with a lot of NDEers, you give us 5 minutes and we're going to start talking about our NDE. Don't know how we enter that conversation, but sure as shit, I did that. We are talking about NDEs. And then I look over and I see she's off the phone now, but she is listening intently. She's watching me like a hawk. And at some point, I like to give people an out. Like, "Oh, yeah, I know this sounds crazy." And they said, No, please tell us more. And then she said, "I have a question. After this near-death experience, did you find you were more intuitive?" And I said, "That's a great question." And I said, "For me, though, it's really about relationships and about really wild timing of things." And I swear to God, at that moment, their daughter walked in and she looked at me and I looked at her and she said, "I remember you." And I looked at the parents, I looked back at her, I said, "How so?" She says, "I'm an emergency room upper thoracic nurse. And I remember you came in from a plane crash."
Hmm.
And I'm thinking, this was 3 years ago. And how differently did I look coming in off a helicopter in a plane crash to standing there and her parents? I mean, who can do that? That's kind of like a magic power right there. So I said, "Wow, well, it's nice to be able to say thank you," because I didn't get to say thank you to everyone because I was out of it. But then I turned and looked at the mom and said, "See, that's the answer to your question. It's about relationships and about weird timing." I said, "And here's a further truth. If I had said, 'Oh, yes, I'm more intuitive,' your daughter's going to walk in 5 minutes and remember me from my airplane crash." I said, "I would have proven my point. I would have answered your question. But in a strange way, I would have kind of owned that moment. But notice how this happened. I did answer your question, and what happened afterwards is consistent with what I said. But it happened in a way that no one can own this moment, because we all own this moment. And that should tell you something about its source." And that was really magical. And 3 years later, every time I drive by that place, I look at it fondly and remember that day. And that's the beauty, is when you connect with people, you connect with them now in a very different way. And I'll say this, 78% of us who have NDEs go through a divorce. And this is something I talk a lot about with groups and all that. But like my ex-wife was over visiting today. And we're good. And one thing I realized in the 18 months of marriage therapy that in theory tried to keep us together was that there are no good people and there are no bad people. They're just people who are overwhelmed. They may be overwhelmed by their desires or their fears or their frustrations, or that things haven't really worked out the way they thought. But all in all, that's how I see each other now. And when we were in therapy one day, she was complaining about, I guess, some it's not like it was bad behavior. It was just something she didn't like. And the therapist said, none of the things you've talked about are enough to have brought you to my office. And I said, well, to her point, let me ask this. Have I done any of these things since my crash? She wouldn't say near-death experience. She would just say airplane crash. She didn't like the idea of a near-death experience. And she said, no, you haven't. And I said, that's good. Because she's a good person, honest person. I said, well, that's because the person who did those things died in the crash.
Hmm.
This is what you have left. And then I felt my near-death experience, the in-between, as I call it. I felt it well up inside me. And I said, and if you want me to put a really sharp point on it, our marriage vow said, till death do us part.
Hmm.
What happens when one of us dies? No matter that we return, our covenant is broken. And the only reason we stay together now is because we choose to. And as I've said before, that truth was not well received. Another inconvenient truth, right? But it was the truth as I saw it. It was the truth as I lived it. And one of the things that, certainly learned is that the death of a spouse can be the most traumatic event that can happen to the other spouse. But the near death of a spouse can be the most traumatic event to the marriage.
Hmm.
Because you look the same, you sound the same, you walk the same, but you're not the same. You have changed fundamentally. You don't have the same shared hopes, dreams, values, fears, prejudices, even. You feel very differently about everything. And I would say, this is sort of a broad stroke statement, but if you're becoming a more spiritual person, chances are a lot of what you shared before is now going to change. And for some marriages, it's enough to break it. And that can be kind of a sad realization. This is where you realize how solitary your path is. It doesn't have to always be lonely, but even in the presence of companions on the journey, there's a lot that's solitary. I'm sure you've heard how tailor-made a near-death experience is to everyone, down to the tiniest degree of certainty, of familiarity, of something that means something only to you and would mean nothing to anyone else. And it's such a tiny detail, yet to you it's significant just because it was there. Well, that speaks to how solitary the journey is. That through just daily living of life, you're going to experience so much more now that has meaning specific to you. Even to another NDEer, they won't see it. It wouldn't mean anything to them because they may not have a reference to that. They may not have an attachment or association to that. So there's, I guess, and this is where sometimes people talk about a sense of emptiness. I said, yeah, it can be really uncomfortable for a while. That's for sure. But in the Tao Te Ching, the ancient Chinese text 2,600 years ago, it says, for example, that a vessel, like a jar, if you will, has value from what is there, meaning if it's made out of gold, right? Or clay. But its utility is from what is not there. So its value is what is there, but its utility is in what it can carry and how much, meaning its emptiness. And that is the lesson spiritually for us. When we become empty, it's because we're being prepared to carry something. And you just sort of in wait and see mode, and see. But for sure, when your heart is filled up with concerns of the world, there's less space for more spiritual things to be present there. And so it's a choice. It's always a choice. That's what my near-death experience was all about, right? Was choices. And so, I've kind of was laughing the other day thinking, when something bad happens and somebody says, "Oh, it's due to Satan," or whatever, it's like, Satan doesn't do anything. I don't think he can do anything, except if you want to sort of project that part of ourselves out and model it as something external from us and call it Satan. It presents choices. You're the one who made the choice. When people, like, I was reading something today, some poor guy is having a problem with being an alcoholic and he's mad at God about it. Like, why hasn't God saved him? I said, you're here because you chose to be here. Unless somebody's holding you down and shoving a bottle down your mouth every day, it's a choice. Why are you blaming God? Why are you blaming, like the devil? I said, it's you. Make a different choice. Be strong enough to make a different choice. I'll give you an example. When I was laying there recovering in the hospital, not that there'd be anything wrong with it, but I will say I am not an alcoholic. However, I had a pretty stressful job as an IT project manager. I would come home at the end of the day and I might make a rum and Coke. Okay. And if it felt good because I was really stressed, I might have, 2, maybe 3 more. And that was it, not like I would pass out or anything or beat the kids or anything like that, but it was definitely a way to just kind of check out. And when I was laying there in the hospital, it's like I was having a conversation with God or the in-between or whatever. And it removed from me like a projection or a representation, like in the air in front of me. Can't really say what it looked like, but I knew it was a representation of alcohol. And it asked me, it said, what do you want to do with this? Do you want to keep it, meaning continue it in your life? Or do you want to leave it behind? It said, if you want to keep it in your life, I will carry it for you. If you want to leave it behind, I will remove all attachment to it. It will have no pull on you. It'll be as if you never had a drink in your life and never thought of it. And instantly I said, leave it behind. And I said, okay. And it just sort of disappeared. And this was 6 years ago. I haven't had a drink since. I have no inclination to. I can go into a liquor store if I'm going to someone's house and buy a bottle of wine. I don't even think about it. I can sit at a bar with friends where liquor's flowing. I don't even think about it. It's something other people do. I've been a vegetarian for 45 years. Eating meat is something other people do. And there's a lot that we can say we do not choose. That is something other people do. But to me, that's where, I kind of marveled at the detachment I now had, like, wow. And at this point, the in-between said, all the force of will you'll ever need is found in the art of letting go. Always live life in celebration of the individual spirit. For no one and no thing can stand before the brilliance of a truly naked soul. And I think that brings us to a topic you and I were talking about before, and one that a lot of people seem to be talking about now, and that is authenticity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that if a person is an atheist, but they're living their life authentically, they're living it spiritually. And even the Buddhists say you don't have to, believe in God to be spiritual. And I think a lot of people, it'd be very natural to ask, well, how's that work? I think that's how it works. Because if you want to live spiritually, you first have to live authentically. If you're not living authentically, you're not living spiritually. You might think you are, but you're just, not. So it's important to be honest with yourself. And here's an example. I'm sure we've all known someone who, like I say, let's continue to use alcohol as an example. They might drink too much. Well, as you know, so many people, if you were to say, we're concerned about you, we think you're drinking too much, they might get defensive. They might go on the attack themselves. They don't want to hear it. But I have certainly talked to the occasional person who literally looked me in the eye and said, I know this thing is bigger than me, and I know I'm ruining my life, and I'm concerned about it. There was no defense. There was no explanation. They totally owned it. And my God, you wanted to give them a hug. You know, just that is authenticity. And there's a humility in that admission that teaches us something about being humble, you know, from this person who is an unlikely teacher. But because they accept the dilemma they're in, they are becoming ready to leave that behind. It may be a moment by moment decision for the rest of their life to not have a drink, but because they've embraced the situation for what it is and they see themselves for who they are, my God, when they talk to other people one day, they'll have an authenticity, they will have an authority in their voice that I would say a preacher in a pulpit who's never had a drink in his life is counterfeit. You tell me who you want to hear your truth from, and I will tell you what path you're on. And so that's why, you know, I wrote 2 books. The first book was simply called The In Between, Trip of a Lifetime. And that's your standard. This was my life before my near-death experience. This was my near-death experience. And this is kind of how the world looked afterwards and how things were changed. But a lot of people, rightfully so, asked, how do we put into our own lives? How do we put any of this into practice? So I thought, you know, these are worthy questions. So the second book is called The Practice in Between, The Art of Letting Go. Again, based on one of the first things the In Between said to me when I was coming out, and that had to do with the alcohol. And then I saw the power of it. And, you know, so many times we think that what's required in spirituality is to gird our loins for battle, to fight off the world and the temptations of the world, and to count our bruises at the end of the day, and brag with people who are equally, you know, wanting to have a fight with the world. And then if someone else doesn't have that same appetite, we look down on them. Yeah, it's just terrible, hard. It's not the right way to do it. It really is about letting go. It's about, I mean, when Jesus said, for example, I die daily, it was really all about letting go. And in fact, it's interesting in the Bible where it says, be still and know that I am God. The more literal translation from the Aramaic was let go and know that I am God. And I think that's pretty cool. And there's an old proverb, you know about the samurai, the Japanese swordsman.
Mm-hmm.
There's an old saying that says, on the field of battle, when a samurai draws his sword and throws away his scabbard, it's because he'll never need it again. On this day, he's free to fight his best. That is letting go. That is how we're meant to live every moment of our lives, no matter what we do, with that much surrender, that much abandon. In terms of, we no longer rely on our history to tell us what it is we know. We rely on our intuition, because when we rely on our intuition, we will know what we need to know exactly when we need to know it. And then when we no longer need to know it, we let it go. And it's so much lighter a way of living. There's so much less to carry around on our shoulders, like all our degrees, all our accomplishments. I have a lot of accomplishments. I have an Emmy from National Geographic. I've been knighted by the King of Malaysia for some favor I did him at Mount Everest. I was a lecturer at Yale University School of Medicine. I field produced a Titanic expedition for a Discovery Channel using satellite technology I invented. I was a war correspondent for NBC News. So see, I get to go down the checklist and say, oh yeah, bing, bang, bing, bang, boom. But it's just all that to me is symptomatic of a person who was really curious and didn't take no for an answer. I wouldn't say I am a genius. I wouldn't say I'm even all that smart. I'd say I'm kind of clever. I figure out how to put things together in a novel way. But does all that matter compared to spirituality? Hell no. No, it doesn't. I would even say even though I've always been spiritually inclined, I would say that before my NDE, it was still more intellectual knowledge than it was spiritual experience, for sure. But now, with an NDE, I would say it's woven into the fabric of my being. And I would even say this because I was asked by someone. She was a vice president at the American Psychical Association in New York City. William James, the famous psychologist in the late 1800s, founded it because he really wanted to have a scientific approach to studying psychic phenomena, paranormal phenomena. And she asked me, she said, on the day that you crashed, did you have a bad premonition? I said, coming from you, that's a perfect question. I said, but as you ask it, I feel moved to respond this way. Forget a premonition. Imagine I had full foreknowledge of what was crystal clear, of what was getting ready to happen. Would I have had the guts to get into the cockpit anyway? To me, that's the question. Because if God says, hey, I need to bring you over here and have a little one-on-one time with you, number one, what price is too great to pay? Number two, if God's doing the asking, do you think you're going to say no? And I will say, for everything that's happened to my body due to the crash, for having, lost the relationship of my marriage because of my NDE, I would still say it was absolutely worth it. It was absolutely worth it. And I'm very grateful for it, because part of being detached is you don't hang on to the pain, and the past is dust, as I was told. And, when I say, you don't hang on to the pain, even if we are feeling a little, or we're feeling sad because of the end of a relationship, whether it's due to an NDE or it's due to someone dying or just a breakup or whatever. It's interesting how many times, especially if it's a parent who's lost a child, how they grieve. And one thing that, and I don't profess to have the medicine to cure all this, but I was talking to one mother one time about it. And I said, it's hard to let go of that pain because that's the last emotion left to you. You loved your child, you still love your child. And every day now is the melancholy of remembering things you did, remembering things you said, and then remembering the things you wish you'd said. And at the end of the day, you feel like when you give up that sorrow, it's the final abandonment of your child. And that's what makes it so hard to let go. But you weren't born to suffer. And your child would not want you to suffer, and you will suffer for as long as you choose to suffer. And that's it. It all comes from within you. So these are some of the highlights that have certainly come out of my reflections that follow. I would say, again, when people say, well, how do we have that? I say, well, a natural way to answer that would be meditate. Make your conversations with God meaningful. Make sure you're listening as well as talking, and make it a conversation. It doesn't have to be a big ritualized prayer where most people are broadcasting anyway. And the creator of the universe doesn't need to be reminded that you need to make next month's rent. That's not a prayer, that's a crisis of faith. So make it more meaningful, have some faith in the grand design. And I would say that find a form of meditation that works for you. Mine's very different. Some people can sit. That's great. Some people do Tai Chi because, that's motion and that's fine. Some people have a walking, like in Zen, they have a walking meditation. Me, I go out for a drive in the morning and I'll do a drive right after we're finished here because that's just God and me time, and I'm out here in the country in Connecticut. It's beautiful. Drive through cornfields, through forests, around lakes. And that's my checkout time. And I've gotten some very interesting realizations as a result of that. And again, I'm grateful for those times. So I would just say, again, whatever works for you and whatever resonates with you, that's part of being authentic, is not doing something that you think you're supposed to do because you're supposed to do it. Do it in a way that's meaningful to you. And one of the things that I thought of too when I came back was that when we choose our relationships, because that's the reason we come here. We don't come here to cure cancer or go to the moon. We come here for the relationships. It's work and play that keep things from being awkward. And no matter who you like spending time with, no matter who you like sleeping with, it boils down to God asking you, are you having a meaningful relationship? And that's what's key. So make your choices about relationship around the things that give meaning to your life, and you give meaning to their lives, and you'll be fine. Again, it's about letting go of all the worry, letting go of other people's judgments. Oh, you shouldn't hang out with those people. Why? They're not your people, they're my people. and we really should just realize that we are all approaching life more as artists than we are engineers. Because in that artistry, things flow, and we are not always sure what's going to happen next because so much of life is whimsy. As an example, this one person went before a guru one time, and they said, is it true that our destiny is written on our foreheads or on our palms? And the guru said, yeah. And the guy said, so why do we need you? And he goes, well, just because you know it's going to happen doesn't mean you can stop it. But come the day that you choose to live within the will of God, you will live within his grace. And that is written in no palm, and that is tracked by no star. You will absolutely not know what's going to happen next. You live by God's whimsy. And I think that's part of the reboot of the NDE. Yeah, I know. A lot of people still get their palms read and their horoscopes tracked and all that. But I really kind of like living by whimsy and not knowing what's going to happen next. And I can tell you, God gets a huge kick out of our sense of discovery, especially when we meet each other. And the more different we are, the more curious we are, right? Well, tell me about you. Tell me about what planet you're from, and what's meaningful to you and why it's meaningful. And by the way, what's your music like and what's your food like? And oh, we're having our holiday today. Come to my house. I'm going to give you presents for my holiday. And then you can invite me to your house on your holiday and give me presents, and we will discover each other. That is why we are here, whether it's the person next door or the person on the other side of the planet. And we realize just how much we have in common. Again, the world and the mind are sophisticated mirrors. They are what they see. So you have to be careful what you show them, for you can be anything. and it's a choice. We wake up in the world we create. It's that simple. That's all I got.
That's awesome. That's probably the first time that I've ever interviewed somebody where every time I thought of a question, you answered it.
Mhm.
Like every single time. I would come up with a question and you would answer it. But I guess to wrap this up, I could ask you, what are some of the ways that you feel like this experience has altered the trajectory of your life path? Like you mentioned in the experience, you remove some future events. Is
Yeah.
do you think maybe you have an idea of what it would have been as opposed to what it became? How did it alter the path?
That's a great question. And I think a lot of it is, like I said, if I look at my life before, it was very direct. It was very goal oriented. And goals were, and don't laugh, the goals were around my childhood dreams. I love science fiction, so I did the technology. I loved travel. I loved animals. I got to travel. I got to live in Africa and make films. I got to do these things, but they were, and then build these old, really cool old airplanes, like from World War One. But that's like having the next big thing, chasing the next big thing, chasing the next goal. And I would say after my NDE, it was more about I don't need to prove anything to myself anymore or the rest of the world. It's more like living a contemplative life, a meditative life. I respond to the inspiration that God sends me. And to inspiration means to breathe life into. And so, as God breathed life into Adam, he breathes life into all of us. And in that breath is the inspiration to do what we will do next and to be watchful and meditatively watchful. Like when a cat sits in front of a mouse hole, that's like meditation. It's just sitting there ready, without distraction, without blinking, just ready for the mouse. That's how we should sit in meditation. That's how we should sit in readiness to move and move quickly when we're told to. So that's how it is now. That's how my life is now. And I don't believe in any accidents whatsoever. I believe everyone I meet, there's a reason we're meeting. Even the people who might, tax my patience, I realize why. And that it's an important lesson. And just, again, sitting in that readiness to understand. And I think that's the other final thing I would say is that, we all have questions, especially big questions about life. But at some point, we realize the answers are not really what we're looking for because we are the question. And so, what we should seek to do is to awaken to the question. And when we do that, the answer is irrelevant. We have that aha moment and we understand why there's even a question. It's so much more than an answer.
Wow. I'm probably going to watch this interview back like 10 times. Like, this is amazing. You did say you wrote a couple of books. Where can we find those books?
All right. Again, I am not trying to sell books, but here they are. This is the first one. Whoa, it's a little bit out of focus there. The In Between. You can get them on Amazon. And this one is The Art of Letting Go. Sorry, that's not even showing up clearly. It's called The Practice In Between, The Art of Letting Go. That's book number 2. And they're on Amazon. And there's also an audiobook version, and it's me. I narrated it myself because my personal belief is anyone who writes a book should, unless they really can't do it, they should try to do their own audio narration, because who can tell your truth better than you? And as I mentioned before, that authenticity of maybe not the perfect, pitch perfect Hollywood, actor voice, but it's sincere and it's authentic, versus having someone who could perfectly read it because they have perfect pitch and all that, but it's not their truth. Which would you rather have? Yeah.
All right. I'm definitely going to link those links, the Amazon links, in the description of the video.
Thank
Before
you.
I do wrap it up, though, did you maybe have one last positive message you wanted to share with the viewers?
Hmm. Well, I think I tell you what, yes. Can I just read a few lines from the last page of my second book?
Absolutely.
This page I read when I buried my mother this year, and I read it when I got married again this year, and I got married where I crashed my plane
Hmm.
because the marriage is, in a sense of rebirth. And it was this: to me, spirituality is when we surrender everything, even a safe harbor in which to drop anchor, accepting everything as in flux. This is what it means to let go. If you ask me, what is the meaning of life? I might answer with silence, because you are life. What else can I add? Just walk it, discover yourself, and realize that you are nothing you were told you are. And when you die, everything you think you are is left at the door. You are more. You are everything. And when you have asked all your questions, and when there is nothing left to be gained, where all roads end, there God begins.
That was awesome, Jim. Thank you so much for being my guest today. I greatly appreciate it. I am going to go ahead and wrap this up now. You have a good day, and I wish you the best. Okay.
Thank you, Rich. All the best.
Bye bye.